How do you do? Jen and Cam feel it would be unkind to present this program without a friendly word of warning. We are about to unfold our true crime podcast, a podcast of lifelong friends who seek to examine crimes which were committed without reckoning upon God. The discussion will be frank, and the subject matter will be of a grim and violent nature. I think it will thrill you. It might even horrify you. So, if there are young children listening, or if you feel unwilling to subject your nerves to such a strain, now's your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, Cam, how are ya?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic.
Good.
Ready to go. I got not great. I have a very interesting
Okay.
thing to discuss today that I kind of delve deep into a book, and it's really interesting, and I hope
Everyone will enjoy it.
Yeah, I would like people to read it, so to discuss it, and I don't know, it's just
like
very
a book club?
interesting. Kind of. I've never been very good at book clubs, though. I really haven't. When I'm pressured to do anything, I don't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, just very interesting, and but we'll talk about it.
Oh, let's hear
as
it.
we go along. All right. So today we're going to head to Toledo, Ohio, and in particular, Mercy Hospital in Toledo, Ohio. And every time I think of Toledo, Ohio, who do I think of? I think of Klinger from MASH. He was from Toledo, Ohio. That's who I think of.
I did not know
that. Anyway, so in particular, we're going to go to Mercy Hospital. Mercy Hospital was built in 1914. It was a 7-story, or is, I should say, a 7-story building run by nuns from the Sisters of Mercy in Toledo, Ohio. The Roman Catholic order was founded in the early 1800s with the intention of helping the sick and those left behind within society. The hospital not only treated those in need, but it housed the nuns who watched over its operation. And this is kind of a little Easter story for you.
Oh.
Just kind of long. Well,
kind of.
Not really. Not
Easter
really.
true crime.
It's set around Easter, let's put it that way.
Okay.
On the morning of April 5th, 1980, which was Holy Saturday, a nun, Sister Madalyn Marie, went to prepare for Easter Sunday, which was the following day. She entered the sacristy and stumbled upon a horrifying scene. And for those that don't know, a sacristy is where the priests keeps their robes, the Eucharists, stuff like that.
Holy stuff.
Holy stuff, papers, everything. Everything that a priest would need to do his job. Sister Madalyn had gone to organize the music for that day's Holy Saturday Mass, and she saw what she initially thought was a CPR mannequin that someone had left out.
It's never a mannequin.
It's not. And when she realized that it wasn't a mannequin, but the body of Sister Margaret Ann Pahl, Sister Madalyn bolted from the sacristy and screamed for help. Sister Phyllis Ann, the administrator of the hospital, arrived within seconds, and she was experienced in medical care and tried to help the elderly nun who lay dying, but there was nothing she could do. Sister Margaret Ann Pahl, a 71-year-old nun, was lying on the floor of the sacristy. Her blue habit, which of course is the uniform that nuns wear, had been moved up around her chest, and her pantyhose and underwear had been pulled down around her ankles. Her face was swollen, and she had clearly been stabbed, but the way her body was positioned, with her arms straight by her side, felt almost ritualistic to Sister Phyllis. Sister Phyllis would later call it an unnatural way. Like she was straight, like as a pin. Actually, in an episode that I watched of it, they said it was like if she was laying in a coffin.
Oh.
Like
so
her arms weren't flailed out. They were completely to her side. Her legs were
So she was
straight.
positioned? Somebody had positioned her
She
that
was
way?
like straight as a pin. Yep. They couldn't find the phone in the sacristy to call the police, so another member of the staff ran to another area of the hospital where officers sat eating. An emergency code was sounded throughout the hospital. The code was Mr. Swift, which is kind of to the better-known Code Blue call. The officers were told that a nun had died in the sacristy. When officers Dieter and Davidson got to the sacristy, there were people in the room. Someone had already protected Sister Margaret Ann's modesty by pulling her habit back down. And despite the number of medical professionals in the building, nothing could be done for the elderly nun. Sister Margaret Ann was given the last rites by the assistant chaplain, Father Swataki. The last rites are prayers and sacraments given by those who are dying, and the act combines the passage Catholics go through, such as atonement, Eucharist, and final prayers. As Father Swateki knelt beside the murdered nun, no one thought to preserve the crime scene, which, we've seen this time and time again. People come in, they touch everything, people walk through the crime scene. Sometimes, as what was the granny killer in Australia that we did for the 12 Nightmares of Christmas, people cleaned up the crime scene. They cleaned up the blood, they washed them all. Yeah.
They think they're helping, but
they do. Father Swataki made the sign of the cross on Sister Mary Ann's forehead, next to an inverted cross that had been made with her own blood, presumably by the person who had killed her. So not only was she dead, she had an upside-down cross in her own blood on her forehead. Like Ash Wednesdays, Catholics with Ash Wednesday. The ash, instead of ash, it was blood, by the way. Just in case you didn't get what I'm saying.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah. Eventually, the area was processed along with the black and white photographs, which were to immortalize the violent scene. The blue habit Sister Margaret Ann was wearing had turned red around her chest, around her left chest. On the left side of her face, there were visible stab wounds, and a white length of cloth was looped around her right arm. While the investigators spoke to people at the hospital, Sister Margaret Ann's body was taken for an autopsy. Just a little side note, all these sisters' names are always so long.
I was just thinking when you said this is an off note, but you know how sisters, when they become a nun, they get a new name?
Yes.
Do fathers do that too?
No. And this Sister Margaret Ann is actually her name. She took a different name before she came to this thing. She grew up with the name Margaret Ann. While the investigators spoke to people at the hospital, Sister Margaret Ann's body was taken for autopsy. The examination was performed by Dr. Renata Fazekas. Hope I pronounced that name right. I apologize if I didn't. Sister Margaret Ann had sustained at least 28 stab wounds to her face, neck, and chest. The wounds in her neck had gone through her windpipe, cervical spine, carotid artery, and larynx. The wounds in her chest had penetrated her left lung, or that deep that her lung was punctured. The nun's face was swollen, and there were significant bruises. Her eyes were bloodshot, which correlated with signs that she had been strangled prior to her death. No murder weapon had been found at the scene, but the wounds looked to have been caused by a thin blade with a distinct shape. The shape was kind of in the shape of a kite.
Kite? Like a fire poker kind of?
Kind of. Like it was I hate to say the sign of a cross and then covered around it, but you know how the structure of a kite is?
Yeah.
Like it had, yeah, that's kind of how it looked.
Interesting. Okay.
There was like a cross and then the kite diamond shape, like an awkward diamond shape. It was believed that Sister Margaret Ann had been raped, but no DNA evidence was found. There were abrasions inside of her as though she had been violated with possibly an object. So let's talk about Sister Margaret Ann Pahl, shall we?
We shall.
Sister Margaret Ann Pahl was born on April 6, 1908 in Edgerton, Ohio. She knew from an early age that she wanted to become a nun, and she joined the Sisters of Mercy in 1927. She worked as a student nurse for a number of years before being promoted to a floor supervisor and assistant superintendent to nurses at the Mercy Hospital in Toledo. By 1948, she had been appointed as a supervisor and administrator at the hospital and worked in high-ranking roles until she stepped down in anticipation of her retirement in the early 70s. Sister Margaret had 4 sisters, 3 of whom became nurses. And those who knew her spoke about her attention to detail and how she always wanted everything to be perfect. And in fact, there was a housekeeper at the hospital said, quote, "She was very, very strict, very firm, and things had to be done a certain way." Which, to me, it sounds like your classic nun. Not that I've ever been raised Catholic, but all those kind of horror stories.
Yeah.
St. Louis is a very Catholic town, so we hear a lot about nuns and strictness and things. The Blade newspaper chronicled the morning of Margaret Ann's death as she woke up at 5 a.m. as usual and was downstairs preparing to clean the chapel when she had breakfast at 6:20 a.m. At 6:45 a.m., she'd left the dining room and her body was found just over an hour later. It emerged that Sister Madalyn Marie had come across a folded altar cloth outside of the chapel, and without realizing what it was, she left it on a pew where it was later found and opened. The white linen was stained in numerous places with blood, and it had what looked like holes pierced through it. So this altar cloth was used and dropped. She found it, placed it on a pew, and Viola, there's your evidence.
Viola.
I had somebody in college once read that. Viola, along with the epitome. Yeah. Sister Margaret Ann's funeral was held at St. Bernardine's Chapel in Fremont on April 8th, 1980. Just wanted to mention this, and I'll mention it later. She died a day before her 72nd birthday. St. Margaret's funeral service was held at St. Bernardine's Chapel in Fremont on April 8th, 1980. Over 200 people were in attendance when the hospital chaplain, Father Gerald Robinson, and assistant chaplain, Father Jerome Switecki, spoke at the Mass. Father Switecki told the mourners that Sister Margaret Ann's death was not only blasphemous, but patently absurd. Her final resting place was at St. Bernardine's Cemetery. Working on the assumption that the nun knew her killer based on lack of any signs of struggle or defense wounds, the investigators questioned everyone who was working or living at Mercy Hospital at the time of the murder. Almost 2 weeks after Sister Margaret Ann had been killed, the chaplain of the hospital, Father Robinson, was brought in to be questioned. After hours of questioning, the priest said that someone had come to confess earlier that week and admitted to killing Sister Margaret Ann. Father Robinson insisted that he couldn't say any more about the confession as it would go against the promise the Catholic priests make. But when pressed, he claimed that he had made it all up and that, no one really had confessed to him. He just wanted to say something so he could go home. Because, saying something like that would totally make you say, oh, okay, since you did that, just go on home.
Yeah.
Nothing like trying to prolong it a little bit later.
It's like, you're okay, sure.
Father Robinson agreed to let the detectives search his apartment in the Mercy Hospital building the next morning. Inside a desk, they found a letter opener with a long curved blade and a guard on the handle. Kind of looked like a little mini sword. The blade was spotless. No significant signs of blood or any fingerprints were found. Father Robinson consented to a polygraph examination, and one of the questions that was asked was, do you know why anyone would have killed Sister Margaret Ann? Father Robinson replied that she had a dominant personality. She was a dominant woman, which we've already heard from. Yep. When the polygraph test was read and came back, it showed signs of deception. And I just want to say that I found it interesting because that he said that she was domineering, or she was very dominant personality. A family friend of Father Robinson had made a comment that his mother, Father Robinson's mother, was kind of an authoritarian and was quoted to say, you do not want to get on her bad side.
Yeah.
Just a little. Just throwing it in there for thought. Just think that over a little bit.
Oh, I'm thinking.
When confronted with the fact that he showed sign of deception on his polygraph test, Father Robinson, he was excused basically. He was just, he was tired and, he was anxious. So who's not going to be, a little upset by doing a polygraph test or exam or whatever they call it, a polygraph. So they decided that they'd do a second test. This time, the test was administered by someone that the priest's lawyer selected.
Oh, okay.
The results, of course, were inconclusive, and without anything significant to tie Father Robinson to the murder, no charges were made against him, and the case went cold.
But they knew. Don't you think they knew? Or they
had let me tell you.
Sneaking suspicion?
When Deputy Chief Ray Vetter retired in 1986, he spoke to the Toledo newspaper, The Blaze, and he spoke about Sister Margaret Ann Pahl's death. And he said that the case was the biggest disappointment in his career. Quote, It's especially perplexing because we know who committed the crime, but we were never able to come up with enough evidence to arrest anyone.
Mm-hmm. I think that happens a lot.
The book I read on this is called Sin, Shame, and Secrets by David Yonk. Now, he was a religious writer for The Blaze, or still is, I should say. And I'll put the book link in the show notes. But it was brought up that the Toledo diocese in 1980 was pretty powerful, very influential.
Mm-hmm.
A few retired police officers from that time were quoted in this book, and this is a bunch of different quotes from different officers. Quote, "You took care of the Catholic Church. There was no negotiation. If you were a Jewish rabbi, a Baptist minister, or an Episcopalian priest, you were shit out of luck. But the police had to take care of the priests. It was an absolute." Another one said, "And there was a Catholic church on every district in the city. You had to sit there. You couldn't write a parking ticket or a speeding ticket. Nothing." Another one was talking about that if there was no way a Toledo policeman could ever arrest a priest, the quote was, "You would have been fired." Yeah. And the book talks about how in 1960s, and along with other cases, the police had been told multiple times about how a priest was raping young boys. And people kept going to the police. It was kind of becoming this huge scandal, and they were putting pressure. The public was putting pressure on the police, telling them, when are you going to arrest this priest? When are you going to do it? When are you going to get him, whatever. Mm-hmm. Instead of arresting the priest, the police had a meeting with the bishop, and then just a little bit later, the priest left silently.
Of course he did.
And they put him in another parish in Louisiana, which we all know how that goes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's when I talked at the beginning about how it was so interesting. There's so much. I liked the book a lot. As far as true crime books go, it's probably up there because it delves more about the politics and the cover up by the church and stuff like that. So I suggest it highly. So 23 years after Father Robinson was suspected of murder, his name came to the attention of the investigators once more. This time, it was after a woman had come forward with allegations of a ritualistic abuse within the Toledo diocese. The woman said that she had been sexually and physically abused by members of the church in her youth, and that she had witnessed satanic rituals where animals and children were sacrificed. Happy Easter. Mm-hmm. The woman said that there had been satanic masses held where she was made to lie in a casket and eat what she believed was a human eyeball.
Oh, no.
She also said that she was taken out of school and held somewhere in the basement where a child was murdered, and then she was raped and had to be kept. She was kept down there for hours. It's something. After someone in the diocese review board reported the allegations, members of the Toledo police cold case team recognized the name of one of the people the woman had accused in taking part of the ritualistic-based abuse. It was then that Sister Margaret Ann's case was reopened. Because who do you think we're going to talk about? Father Gerald Robinson was named. Another one of the priests that was named, before anybody, thinks that this is just a wild tale of child's imagination. Another priest that was named was Chet Warren. And it wasn't the first time he had been named in raping little girls, some as young as 4 or 5, to be quite honest. Ugh. He was never officially charged, though, but he was defrocked in 1993, but he still would wear his priest's collar. Just FYI.
If that was yanked away from him, how did he do that? I guess why did he do it, not how?
It's like if you lose your doctor's license, they can't stop you from wearing scrubs.
Yeah, you're right, but still. Have some pride, criminy sake.
He's raping little girls. I doubt he has any pride.
You're exactly right. And yeah.
The scum of the earth in my book. But anyway, Officer Davidson, who had been one of the first on the scenes in April 1980, had continued to lobby for the case to be reinvestigated for years. And by late December 2003, the cold case detectives began reviewing the evidence again. When they unfolded the altar cloth and examined the bloodstains and holes, they noticed a pattern. 9 stab marks were found on the 10-foot linen cloth that correlated to wounds found on Sister Margaret's body. And when lined up, they formed the shape of an inverted crucifix. Detectives believed that the killer had covered the nun's body with the altar cloth and placed a cross on top of it before stabbing her around the outline of the upside-down cross. A blood transfer pattern analysis was conducted by Paulette Sutton, the Assistant Director of Forensic Services at the Regional Forensic Center in Memphis. Ms. Sutton compared the stains found on the cloth with the letter opener that had been found in Father Robinson's apartment 24 years earlier. She concluded that some of the stains were consistent with the shape of the letter opener. It appeared as though it had been wiped on the cloth while it was drenched in blood. There were circular bloodstains found that had features that resembled those on a medallion attached to the letter opener. Also analyzed were the clothes Sister Margaret Ann was wearing when she was killed. An Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation scientists tested a stain found on the waistband of Sister Margaret Ann's underwear, and although they could not get the definitive DNA profile, they were able to conclude that there were traces of male DNA. I just want to do a little side note because I thought it would totally be my luck. They had also taken one of the priest's cassocks, or something that the priest wore, Father Robinson wore, and it had a stain on it, so they tested the stain, and this would so be me. It was gravy.
I was going to say like orange chicken sauce or something.
Yeah. No, it was gravy. It just made me laugh. They were positive it was going to be, Lou, we found a stain, and yeah, it's just gravy. That's like most of my shirts have food stains on them anyway. As is routine in a cold case review, the original witnesses, those who are still alive anyway, were re-interviewed. New witnesses who were there at the time of the murder but who hadn't given statements were also brought in. Lead investigators Sergeant Steve Forrester and Detective Tom Ross re-examined the statements from the 1980 investigation. Between the original statements and new interviews, the investigators were able to place Father Robinson in the vicinity of the murder scene. He had told the detectives at the time that he had not left his apartment all that morning and had only learned of the incident while he was getting dressed.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't true. Mm-hmm. Lots of people saw him. Some of the police officers, I don't think, wanted to hear it. On the afternoon of April 23, 2004, detectives arrived at Father Robinson's house at 2401 Nebraska Avenue with a search warrant. They brought the then 66-year-old semi-retired priest to the Scott Park police station next door and arrested him on suspicion of murder while the house was searched. The evidence that was found was not made public until 2 years later. When interviewed, Father Robinson said that he had been getting dressed after a shower when he was told about Sister Margaret Ann's death. He claimed that he had put on his clothes and rushed to the sacristy where Father Swataki accused him of being the murderer. Father Swataki died in 1996, and Robinson said they never spoke about it afterwards. Just let you know that they put a lot of blame on Father Swataki, especially after his death. Because, so. It's easy that way. The detective told him that they had witnesses who could testify that he had been seen around the chapel at the time Sister Mary Ann was murdered, and that he had not come to the scene at all. But Father Robinson remained adamant that he didn't have anything to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
He claimed that he didn't even have a key to the sacristy. And when asked about the letter opener, he said that it had been a gift from the Boy Scouts and that no one else had access to his apartment.
Mm-hmm.
After a couple hours, the interview ended, and after Detective Ross left the room, Robinson was seen on camera putting his head in his hands and whispering to himself, quote, "I know I didn't do it, sister. Won't you come and show them to prove it?"
Mm-hmm.
Father Robinson was held in Lucas County Jail before he was arraigned in Toledo Municipal Court. His attorney, John Thebes, told the press, quote, "There's a reason these cases are cold and sit for 24 years, because the evidence is not good to begin with. I've had 2 of these so-called cold cases before, and they've both ended in acquittal." Father Robinson was charged with aggravated murder following a grand jury indictment and then released on bail. The Blade reported that around 70 people gathered to celebrate his release. Some of those in attendance had posted their homes and money towards the priest's bond.
Mm.
In mid-May 2004, Sister Margaret Ann Pahl's body was exhumed from St. Bernardine Cemetery for further analysis. Dr. Diane Barnett, a Lucas County deputy coroner, had reviewed the original autopsy report and photographs. She believed that Sister Margaret had not been choked by someone's hands, but that someone had wrapped something like a cloth around her throat and pulled it so forcefully that it broke the two bones in her neck, which is the hyoid. Isn't that what it's called? The Hyoid, hyoid bone. Yep. And it caused her necklace to be pushed into her skin, which left a clear impression. A DNA sample was taken from Sister Margaret's remains, and her wounds were examined closely to determine if the letter opener could have been the murder weapon. Dr. Barnett consulted with Julie Saul, the director of forensic anthropology, and removed sections of the nun's mandible where it was clear knife marks. The letter opener had a 4-sided blade, which left a distinct mark when it pierced the victim's skin and hit the bone. In fact, they were able to put the blade carefully into the wound to prove that it was almost certainly the murder weapon.
Oh, that's awful.
So the trial began in the last week of April 2006. Assistant County Prosecutor Don Mandros addressed the court and told them that the state would prove that Father Robinson was in the sacristy with Sister Margaret Ann on the morning of April 5th, 1980, and that he caused her, quote, unholy death. The defense compared the state's case to a puzzle that didn't fit together and said that DNA evidence would prove that Father Robinson was not the killer. The first witnesses to testify were the nuns who were the first ones to see Sister Margaret Ann's body in the sacristy. Sister Madalyn Marie Gordon told the jury, quote, I was in there a matter of seconds, then I ran out of the sacristy and screamed. The administrator at the time, Sister Phyllis Ann Gerald, testified that, quote, it was terribly strange and sad and horrifying. She said the killing had seemed ritualistic to her. Lieutenant William Kinna, who worked the case in 1980, said that they felt that the killer had been known to Sister Margaret because, quote, it would take somebody with a vendetta to kill someone in such a ferocious manner. He testified that he had been told the wounds were caused by a long blade that was no wider than half an inch, and they later found the letter opener in Father Robinson's apartment. Detective Terry Cusino, who worked on the reinvestigation of the cold case, opened the altar cloth for the jury and showed them the 9 holes formed the shape of an inverted cross. He also demonstrated how the bloodstains matched the shape of the letter opener. The coroner, Dr. Barnett, demonstrated how Sister Margaret Ann's neck bones, like I said, hyoid bones, were broken as she was strangled with a soft ligature. She also pointed out the indentation found on the nun's lower jawbone. She said that when she gently placed the tip of the letter opener's blade inside the indentation, that it was a perfect fit. That was in quotes, by the way. Perfect fit. She spoke about the second autopsy performed and told the court, quote, believe it or not, 24 years later, you could actually see many of the stab wounds in the skin. Blood transfer and DNA evidence testimony was given to the court where it was revealed that DNA found in clippings of St. Margaret Ann's nails did not, in fact, match Father Robinson, but they may have matched the coroner or the detectives who had handled the evidence. Forensic anthropologist Stephen Stimes testified that he had examined the wounds in St. Margaret Ann's jaw and compared it to the impressions of the letter opener made using molds. And then here's our friend, Dr. Henry Lee, a renowned forensic investigator who had testified at the O.J. Simpson trial about footprints. He told the court that he had begun examining the evidence on December 2004, and he showed the jury the similar impressions made on the altar cloth and impressions made by the letter opener. His testimony corroborated findings by Paulette Sutton, who had found that the circular bloodstains found on the altar cloth were almost identical to those made by the medallion on the side of the letter opener. Mr. Lee told the jury about the different kinds of bloodstains. First, there's the static, which are made when the item covered with blood touches off something directly. Then there's dynamic stains, which are made when an object moves across the surface, like the blade being wiped on a cloth. You can impress your friends and family with that information.
I was just thinking about that. I never really thought about that. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mr. Lee concluded that Sister Margaret Ann had been subdued and was lying down when she was stabbed. The lack of blood found around the sacristy could be explained by the altar cloth covering the initial wounds as the knife was plunged into her skin. Witnesses who were in the hospital building on the morning of the murder testified that the chapel door was locked at 7 a.m. Shirley Ann Lucas, one of the housekeeping staff at the hospital, said that Sister Margaret Ann had come to her upset the day before when Father Robinson had cut short the Good Friday Mass. And she didn't like that at all. It was much shorter than she would have liked it to be. Miss Lucas recalled the nun taking her hand, saying, quote, "Why do they cheat God from what belongs to him?" Remember, she's particular, or she was particular. She liked things a certain way. Mm-hmm. Other witnesses spoke about hearing someone running down the hallway around the time of the murder. Another housekeeper said that she had seen the letter opener in Father Robinson's apartment when she was cleaning it, and she said, quote, "When I seen that letter opener, I just had bad feelings and I walked out of the room." Testimony about ritualistic and satanic-based violence came from Father Jeffrey Grobe, a priest who was an expert in exorcisms in Chicago. He told the court that the murder had occurred on the most holy weekend of the year for Catholics. He testified that on Good Friday, the Eucharist was moved from the chapel to the sacristy to symbolize Christ's death, and it is brought back out again on Easter Sunday to symbolize the resurrection. Testimony about ritualistic and satanic-based violence came from Father Jeffrey Grobe, a priest who was an expert in exorcisms in Chicago. Father Grobe said, quote, "You're taking someone that's dedicated to God, and every aspect that you're violating. We're talking about a woman who had consecrated her life to God, who was the bride of Christ, who was, I presume, in a virginal state, forsaking all others to be so degraded and violated." He said that the time and location of the murder indicated satanic worship and sacrifice, and the inverted cross, he said, was, quote, "an affront against the sacred. It's a reversal. They take something that is sacred and turn it upside down, literally. It defies the very thing that is sacred." The final witness for the prosecution were members of the staff from the hospital who placed Father Robinson near the scene. Dr. Jack Barron testified that after hearing the emergency call, he rushed to the sacristy but ran in the wrong direction by mistake. And as he turned back, he passed a priest who was walking away from the area. Dr. Barron didn't know the priest's name, but gave a description which perfectly matched the defendant, who was a much younger man at the time the crime was committed. Dr. Barron said, quote, "I'll never forget it. He gave me a stare that went right through me. He didn't say a word." Leslie Kerner testified that she saw Father Robinson standing near the chapel doors before 7 a.m. on the morning of the murder, and she knew him by name. Grace Jones, and not that Grace Jones that you're thinking of, a different Grace Jones, told the court, you know who I'm talking about, don't you?
Totally, yeah.
Oh, okay. Grace Jones told the court that she had been waiting for an elevator between 7:30 a.m. that morning, and she saw Father Robinson leave the chapel with a duffel bag. After over 30 witnesses had testified, the prosecution rested their case. The defense called witness to discredit the forensic testimony, most notably Dr. Kathleen Reichs. We know Dr. Reichs. The TV show Bones was inspired by Dr. Reichs, the forensic anthropologist. She's also a New York Times bestselling author. She writes hundreds of books. In this case, she had reviewed the autopsy reports and photographs. She disagreed with the methods used to test if the letter opener was the weapon used. She said that it could have caused damage to the bone and contaminated the evidence. And she admitted that she had not directly examined any of the evidence, and the defense attorneys said that they had not been notified that Sister Margaret Ann's remains had been exhumed until after she was reinterred. So that basically means they weren't given a chance to do any kind of looking into it themselves.
Right.
Officers from Toledo Police were called to discredit claims that the police department had conspired with the diocese to cover up the crime. The then Deputy Chief of Police, who I mentioned, Ray Vetter.
Eddie's brother.
Yeah, I mentioned him earlier. He had allegedly cut short an interview between detectives and Father Robinson in 1980. And there was rumors forever that he helped did the cover-up. He denied the allegations, and he just said there's no way that the police were helping the church cover the crimes. The Monsignor was with him at the time, and Vetter admitted that they were close friends, but said that his job as deputy police chief came first. Vetter said that the case was, quote, probably the most notorious one we ever had while I was in the police department. But after a week or two, he felt as though the investigation had gone as far as it could. There was insufficient evidence to secure an arrest or a conviction. Despite the testimony about the satanic and ritualistic elements to the murder, the prosecutor said in his closing statements that it was, quote, perhaps the most common scenario there is for a homicide. A man got very angry at a woman, and the woman died. The only thing different is that this man wore a white collar and the woman wore a habit.
Happens all the time.
It does. Mandros told the jury that if they didn't believe that Father Robinson was the murderer, then they would have to believe in, quote, an amazing series of coincidences. He told the jurors that after stabbing the 71-year-old nun over 30 times, he anointed her head with blood, pulled down her underwear, and penetrated her with either the weapon, a crucifix, or something else entirely.
That's sick.
It was a violent crime indicative of someone with extreme rage that was directed at Sister Margaret Ann herself or the church as a whole. The defense said that the reinvestigation had only focused on Father Robinson and that evidence and reports had been lost that could have proven his innocence. Before the jury was dismissed, Judge Thomas Ossowick told them that they were not permitted to review the court transcripts, and they had not been allowed to take notes during the trial. I think that's kind of sketchy, don't you? You can't review any of the transcripts, and you can't take notes.
Yeah.
It's got to all be in that. I don't like that at all.
Mm-mm.
They were permitted to review the evidence presented, and they must be unanimous in their verdict. After over 6 hours of deliberations, the jury returned to the Lucas County Common Pleas Court and announced that they had found Father Gerald Robinson guilty of murder. The priest remained silent and emotionless as he had throughout the proceedings. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison with a minimum of 10.5 years to be served before he was eligible for parole.
That's it?
Mm-hmm. He was 66 or 67 at the time, so he ain't getting out.
Yeah, it's a life sentence, I guess.
Alive, anyway. The defense announced their intention to file an appeal. Father Robinson's supporters, including his sister-in-law, were emotional following the verdict. Father Robinson's sister-in-law told Claudia Versalati from the Victims of Clerical Abuse Advocacy Group to rot in hell as she left the courtroom.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm. Sister Margaret Ann's surviving sisters did not attend the trial, but her nephew, Lee Pahl, did. Lee said that the family had not expected the murder to ever be solved, but they were glad the ordeal was behind them. Following the conclusion of the trial, the prosecutor's office released more information that had not been presented in court, such as the over 100 photographs of dead bodies in casket that the priest had, and a book on the occult that were all found in the priest's house in 2004. The book had passages underlined about human sacrifices, but it was published by the church and could have easily been explained away in court, as could the photographs, which were traditional in Eastern European cultures who memorialized their relatives by keeping the final photographs taken from them. The culture is to collect those of your family. He had like hundreds from what I've heard, or he had more than just his family. Mm-hmm. would have. But I know people that collect postmortem photographs. It's not that uncommon. I mean, the photographs themselves are kind of uncommon because they go from family member to family member. But to have those, I don't think is a big deal. That's just my opinion. I love old photographs, and to me, that's just the that's no big whoop, as they say, as the kids say today.
As the kids say today. It's right.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, they'd say NBW. NBW.
Yeah.
That's what they say.
The prosecutor called the murder a textbook satanic cult killing, but felt it would be too difficult to prove that at the trial, so they decided to pursue it as a typical murder case. Mandros said, quote, "It's another legal element that would have to be in the indictment, and once you argue that's what this was, you would have been accepting the burden of proving that beyond a reasonable doubt to those 12 people. Why would I want to give myself that additional obligation? A civil suit was filed by a woman who alleged that Father Robinson was part of a satanic cult that abused her as a child. She said that she'd recognized him from a news report about his arrest in 2004. She was the second woman to accuse the priest of something like this, but still he had a litany of supporters who advocated for his release. He filed a request to be released while he waited his appeal, but this was denied. The civil suit was dismissed over and over again, but the survivor was determined to get justice and kept appealing, which kept her accounts in the abuse in the media. Her attorney, Mark Davis, said, quote, I have absolutely no doubt if given our day in court that we would be able to prove that this cult existed and the victim was abused. Numerous appeals were filed and dismissed between 2006 and 2011, where Robinson's attorneys argued that evidence of other possible suspects had not been presented at the trial. In particular, Coral Eugene Watts. That name ring a bell? He's a convicted serial killer known at the time as the Sunday Morning Slasher.
Oh.
He lived in Michigan at the time of the murder. The defense claimed that this correlated with the witnesses' accounts of those who saw a black male in the area who matched Watts' description. Watts had been eliminated as suspect because his M.O. differed from the murder of Sister Margaret Ann, and I believe, if I recall, Coral Watts would actually kidnap his victims, then he would torture them and then kill them. That's all I know really about him. The defense also said that Father Jerome Swatecki should have been pursued as a suspect also. They produced statements from 1980 in which a nun said Father Swatecki had a bad temper and he collected knives. He was a woodworker, by the way. But the nun later said that she didn't know the priest and she didn't recall signing her name to that statement. That's very suspicious.
I think if you are signing a police statement, I don't think that's something you would forget very easily.
Well, and
unless you're signing them every single week.
Really easy to pin something on somebody when they've been dead for years. The civil suit was ultimately dismissed due to the statute of limitations, which allows for legal action to be taken when abuse is reported up to 12 years after the victim turns 18. The woman was in her mid-40s when she filed the dispute. She said that she could not have filed the report earlier because she did not know his name before he was arrested for murder. For 7 years, Father Robinson's legal counsel filed appeal after appeal and motions to try to get him released. When his appeals had been exhausted by 2014, Father Robinson became very sick and he was moved into hospice care. Then, aged 76 with a heart condition, his lawyers tried to get compassionate timed release, but it was ironically denied on the day before he died. In the filing for compassionate release, his lawyer claimed that the Little Sisters of the Poor in Oregon had offered to care for Father Robinson in his dying days.
Oh, I bet they would.
But the nuns came out and denied ever offering to care for him at all. And in fact, they hadn't even been asked if they would care for him.
Interesting. I wonder,
Little lies. Father Robinson died on July 4th of 2014. His lawyer, Rick Kurgel, said, quote, I'm sorry he passed and I'll miss him, but he's in a better place now. With his faith, he'll be just fine.
Will he,
or
though?
He'll be fine.
Will he, though? Huh.
But that part is up for debate. Father Robinson never admitted his guilt, so he could never be forgiven, right? That's something that the Catholic Church must seek in order to be accepted into heaven. Regardless, he was given a priest's burial, as he remained an ordained priest at the time of his death, despite being a convicted murderer. The detective who advocated for Sister Margaret Ann's murder, her murder case to be reopened for many years, David Davidson, he died in the year 2020, just 2 years ago. He was remembered as someone with a strong conviction of right and wrong and worked as a cruelty investigator for the Humane Society and rescued many dogs. I would have gotten along with that gentleman just famously. The allegations of satanic abuse against Father Robinson and other members of the church were deemed credible, but they were never proven, nor were they disproven. What is known, though, is that the Toledo diocese has a history of dealing with problematic priests without involving the police. But anyway, special thanks to the Blade news outlet for their coverage, and in particular, the religion editor, David Yonk, who wrote the book about the case, which I loved, by the way. It's called Sin, Shame, and Secrets, a true story of the murder of a nun, the conviction of a priest, and the cover-up in the Catholic Church.
That is a long title.
It is a very long title, and the book is really good. It delves into a few priests, maybe 2 or 3 priests that the Catholic Church knew that they were raping children, and they swept it under the rug. They just moved the priest around. It's pretty...
How could you live with yourself if you knew that and you covered it up?
I don't know.
Makes you know better than the person doing it.
It talks about how the diocese had secret files that, like, when they asked for files on Father Robinson, they only gave him 14 pieces of paper, and it didn't even include him being talked to by the police in the 1980s. I mean, and they're like, well, you didn't ask for that specifically. You know, I mean...
Okay, that's what we're doing. Okay, I see.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. And David Yonk was like at the trial day to day. I mean, he was the reporter on scene. Definitely, if you're looking for a good true crime read, this book is a good true crime read. It's not the light fluff true crime, but it's not. You know what I'm saying, right?
It's a good book.
It's a good book. It's not doesn't delve too deep, but yet it doesn't just skim to give you the gory graphic details. Although he does talk about some of the satanic rituals that these women claim to have happened.
Mm-hmm. Ew.
So
terrible.
What do you think about the whole satanic ritual thing, and especially in the 80s?
I think that could have been him covering it up, trying to pawn that off on that's who did it. You know, because it's if you're a nun and you're a practicing Satanist, I guess, or whatever, cultist, I guess would be more, that would be a perfect scapegoat. You know, because a father and a nun are right underneath the...
Well, I think it was staged that way.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
To make it look like that, yeah. Personally, I think he was mad at her. Maybe she got on his case about cutting she's very persnickety and she wanted things a certain way. Mm-hmm. That's what she was. And she was probably mad about other things besides the week before the sermon. Mm-hmm. The week before was cut short. And he had a mother who's very dominant. And we all know that that sometimes gets people, you know, a little, your mom, overbearing mother.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then since he had the book about satanic cults, maybe he made it look like he did. I don't know.
Right. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. But what do you think about the girls that came forward saying that he was in a cult?
I don't know if I believe that. But, I mean, who's to say?
I mean, we can't. It's their experience. The only thing that I think of, and I believe them, if they say it happened, I believe them that they say it happened.
Right.
But I always think of the time for years. I was really sick as a child and I had to go into the hospital and I had to get a shot. And for years, I thought the person who administered the medication, the injection for me, was somebody on the housekeeping staff.
It wasn't, though, was it?
No, but like up until 15 years ago, I would have sworn to you that it was a member of the janitorial staff that gave me a shot.
Maybe they
and
did,
I could see the person of my hand. No, because I talked to my mom and my mom laughed at me. She goes, no, there's no way.
No, I know, but you don't know. Your mom could have went to the bathroom. You don't know.
Because I remember the whole scenario because my mom told me that if I, this is so silly. I was young. Okay. My mom told me that if my mom told me that if I handled the shot really well and I didn't cause a scene or I didn't scream or cry or throw a fit like kids do when they have to get a shot, that she would buy me a toy, a taffy maker.
Not a taffy maker.
A taffy maker. I have no idea. I never wanted a taffy maker. I don't know why I was promised a taffy
didn't
maker.
You?
But no, that's what she told me, that she would buy me this taffy maker. I mean, I loved my little baking, my Betty Crocker bake thing. So I remember the whole scenario and I remember being really good. And I remember I could see the face of the woman who administered the shot to me. And I could see the janitorial uniform that she had on. My mom's like, that never happened. I mean, you did get the taffy maker. You were good, but it was a nurse. And then as soon as she said that, I remember a woman, a custodian, walking past the room with the bucket just as I was getting the shot. Mm-hmm. So that's how my brain worked that situation.
Processed it.
Right. So it kind of makes me wonder. I have no doubt in my mind that these women were abused by these priests. I just kind of wonder if maybe something else got jammed.
Mixed up?
Yeah.
Signals mixed?
I don't know. I mean, I totally believe them. If they said it happened, it happened. They were definitely abused and it caused major trauma in their life. Mm. But there's something about the satanic thing. And I think it's because I grew up in the 80s with the satanic panic and it was just so ridiculous back then. And I'm not saying that satanic abuse doesn't happen. I'm not saying it doesn't, but I remember just how it was put into our heads that everything was satanic. Mm-hmm. That's because it was we couldn't go trick-or-treating because the white van had Satanists in it. Mm-hmm. Everything was about Satan and Satan worshipers and such.
Yeah, I agree. I remember.
I don't know, but I believe these women. It is what it is. It's what they remember. I believe they were abused and I believe they suffered majorly. So I don't know. It's interesting. I'd love for you people to pick up the book and tell me what they think about it.
That's a good story. It's terrible and I can't believe. I think there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind closed doors that we have no idea what is happening, and I think that's probably a good thing.
Well, and the survivor, Doe, the one who brought one of the lawsuits, the later lawsuit, she recalls Father Robinson and another man, and I'm unsure if he was actually a priest, but she recalls this kind of ritual that they did, and the one guy actually said, well, yeah, we did this. There was this group that it was a joking thing about, and we did these things that she's talking about, but there wasn't the sex part.
Yeah. I saw Rosemary's Baby. That's all I'm going to say about that.
That's true.
You know what I'm saying?
All the other stuff. I know. It could happen. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying that I always pause when satanic panic comes. Yeah.
You should. Never believe everything you hear.
Take pause.
I mean, we know that, right? Mm-hmm.
Yep. So anyway.
All right. That was a good story, Jen.
That was. And I want to thank Eileen MacFarlane. She's been helping me write all these scripts for the past couple weeks. She is amazing and I love her and kudos to her. So there you go.
Nice. Until then, Jen, until next time, remember, lock your doors.
And keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya. Today's episode was researched and written by Eileen MacFarlane. For more information about this episode, as well as all the sources, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by hosts Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Batiste from We Talk of Dreams. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October of OctoberPod VHS. Because who do you think we're going to talk about? Dr. Father Gerald. Dr. Father.
Dr. Father. He's very educated.
There's so many little, yeah.